everyone. So, for our final project, we chose the topic of diaspora and we decided to focus on how Nikkei Brazilians are treated in Japan and how the government could possibly help solve this issue.
Starting off with the context for the Nikkei Brazilian diaspora in Japan, it first starts off with a large movement of Japanese people to Brazil in the late 19th century, typically for economic reasons and employment. And there, a lot of the Japanese residents maintained their Japanese roots. They were called Ise in Brazil, and they often hosted schools for Japanese culture learning and learning the Japanese language among the younger residents, and they were faced with a lot of discrimination from Brazilian residents. And in the 1980s, Nikkei Brazilians, the descendants of these Japanese immigrants to Brazil, they returned to Japan and they are let in through these side door policies that Japan implemented, where they were kind of allowed in through ancestral means where they had Japanese heritage and were therefore let in. Really, this was to appease the demand for unskilled labor in Japan at the time, due to the large economic bubble happening. These side door policies did not provide substantial support for ethno-national issues within Japan, such as the Japanese context that we discuss in class a lot between the problem between ethnicity versus nationality in Japan and the significance that these hold. And these Nikkei Brazilians faced a lot of discrimination from different groups within Japan, and they were often treated unequally due to their traditions that they would share, and there was a lot of negative stigmas surrounding Brazilian culture within the country. And this image demonstrates the increase of Brazilian residents to Japan during the 80s and 90s economic bubble in Japan. You can see that at the 1990 mark, it starts to rise very sharply compared to the other populations.
The Nikkei Brazilian experience isn't necessarily unique in the sense that many diaspora groups around the world have faced cultural struggles when returning or trying to return to a quote unquote ancestral homeland. However, what sets Nikkei Brazilians apart is the way that they've been isolated both socially and culturally in Japan. Unlike traditional immigration stories that are rooted in a desire for new beginnings or an escape, the Nikkei Brazilian migration to Japan is primarily transactional. It wasn't about connecting Nikkei Brazilians to Japan in the sense of trying to connect ancestral homelands. It was a solution that Japan implemented to fix a labor crisis during an economic boom in the late 20th century. And to allow for a large influx of workers to meet this criteria without challenging the idea of a homoethnic nation that Japan has kept going on since the Meiji era. The Japanese government categorized Nikkei Brazilians as people that are trying to reconnect with their ancestral homeland, which treats this migration as cultural when it's mainly just an economic transaction.
Our ideal outcome can be divided into three main components: the breaking down of the homogeneity myth, the elimination of discrimination towards returning diaspora in Japan, and systemic changes that are created through the implementation of Tobunka Kyosei policies. The myth of homogeneity in Japan is deeply ingrained in its society and culture, as can be seen by politicians such as former Prime Minister Yasuhiro Nakasone describing Japan as one nation, one civilization, one language, one culture, and one race, like of which there is no other on this earth. When looking at this myth within the context of the experience of Nikkei Brazilians in Japan, it is interesting to note how, despite Nikkei Brazilians falling under the nation, language, culture, and race categories that Nakasone describes, they're still not considered pure Japanese. Despite being ethnically Japanese, they are not considered Japanese enough because their nationality is not Japanese. However, there are many people who are not ethnically Japanese, but are nationally Japanese, and are also not considered Japanese enough by society. This begs the question as to what it even means to be Japanese. If it's not ethnicity and not nationality, then what is it? We believe that breaking down the myth of homogeneity by questioning what it means to be Japanese is a crucial step in creating more acceptance towards Nikkei Brazilians and other Japanese diasporic groups in Japan. The most ideal of outcomes is the complete elimination of discrimination towards these diasporic groups. This is, of course, not realistic in nature, but steps can begin to be made through social, educational, and legal reforms that can lead to further acceptance for these groups within society, which then ultimately leads to discrimination beginning to be eliminated. We delve further into these reforms in our solutions section. Lastly, in order for these two components to become real, there must be systemic changes that are implemented. We believe that this can be done through Tobunka Kyosei policies. Tobunka Kyosei can be translated as multicultural coexistence, and is a framework that works to socially integrate foreign residents and immigrants into Japan. As we saw in our class discussion of Chikako Kashiwazaki's article on multicultural discourse and policies in Japan, Tobunka Kyosei policies have been primarily performative in Japan. By mainly focusing on the three Fs, fashion, food, and festival, Tabunka Kyosei only touches the surface layer of issues without delving into systemic changes. Tabunka Kyosei has been used to grow tolerance towards the diaspora, foreigners, and immigrants. So we believe that taking things a step further by implementing systemic changes through these policies will be the push that is needed to create change for these minority groups in Japan.
So to wrap up, we came up with some prospective solutions that could be implemented by the Japanese government to help solve this problem. We split them into three categories: social, education, and legal reforms. And under social reforms, the first thing that we decided was that we wanted to establish a national Nikkei Brazilian Culture Day in Japan. This actually already exists in Hawaii and Brazil, so it's about time that Japan catches up. The second that we proposed is the establishment of a Brazilian culture center/museum. There isn't a lot of information in Japan right now about Brazilian culture, so this would help them understand their Nikkei Brazilian neighbors a little bit better. The third is to recognize Catholic holidays or any other Brazilian cultural holidays so that Nikkei Brazilians would have a space to keep practicing their culture and other Japanese people could potentially learn more about it. Next, under education reforms, we decided that it would be a good idea to implement Portuguese language elective classes for schools in areas with a large population of Nikkei Brazilians. That way they could stay connected to their culture, and also Japanese students could have a chance to learn a language unfamiliar to them. Secondly, diversity scholarships for Nikkei Brazilian college students would help the education rate within the community and promote a little bit more equity and equality in that area. Next, we decided to implement cultural festivals in schools, where students can share about their culture or culture that they're interested in so that Nikkei Brazilian students could feel a little bit more included in school. Lastly, under legal reforms, we said to adjust labor laws for exploitative conditions of immigrants because a lot of Nikkei Brazilian immigrants end up working in factories or in really unsafe conditions and are underpaid, so reforms would definitely help with that. Next, government-sponsored resources for Japanese language classes because many Nikkei Brazilians don't speak very good Japanese, and that could hinder their abilities to succeed in the workplace. After that, the increased representation of Nikkei Brazilians/other diasporas in government, because the best way to advocate for certain groups of people is to represent them within the government. And finally, stricter laws regarding equal renting opportunity, plus fines or harsher punishment for landlords who discriminate based on background, because that is quite a large issue in Japan, so implementing this would help the equality within the housing system. We hope you enjoyed our presentation, and we hope you were able to learn something more today, and thank you for watching.